Welcome to those of you who did come out tonight. We are so thankful for you to be here supporting the Addison County Democratic Committee and WomenSafe with your attendance. I just want to take a moment to thank the American Legion who donated this terrific space to us free of charge. So I want to give a big thanks to them. So tonight's topic, sexual and domestic violence, has a topic that has long been kind of swept under the rug, but has more recently come out into the light, I think, as a result of the Me Too movement, as a result of allegations of sexual violence that made the news during the 2016 presidential campaign. My name is Becky Strum. I'm a committee member helping to plan these events, and I'm also a board member on WomenSafe. Thank you so much to our panelists tonight. They're all working on a daily basis confronting sexual and domestic violence. So I just want to introduce each one, and then we'll go back and we'll hear from each one for about 5-10 minutes on the on the work that they do, and then we'll open it up to your questions, and then at the end we have lots of delicious chocolate desserts. So on my right, we had advertised that Detective Chris Bowdish was going to be with us tonight. Unfortunately, this morning she came down with strep throat. So at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Detective Ruth Whitney agreed to step in for her. So we are so grateful for Ruth being here tonight. And then Carrie Duquette Hoffman, who is the Executive Director of WomenSafe, Dennis Wegmans, Addison County State's Attorney, and Melissa Dees of Domestic Violence to Responsible Choices. So they will tell you now about what they're involved with.
Again, I'm Ruth Whitney. I'm a detective with the Addison County Unit for Special Investigations. That was started several years ago. Every county in the state of Vermont has a Special Investigations Unit. Our unit is located in the Sheriff's Department upstairs in the former jail. It has been totally revamped to be a friendly space. We have a waiting room, we have a child's interview room, we have an adult interview room. And our interviews are video recorded and audio recorded. So when possible, we have the victims come to the Addison County Unit for Special Investigations, the Child Advocacy Center at the Sheriff's Department for the interviews. That's not always possible, but that's our goal. We work closely with our community partners, WomenSafe, the State's Attorney's Office, Probation and Parole, the Counseling Service, the Victim Advocate. We have a Victim Advocate assigned to our unit. So when a victim comes in to meet with a detective, whether it's me or Detective Bowdish or someone from the state police, there's a victim advocate there to help meet their needs and to make an introduction and help walk them through the system, whether it goes through the court system or not. We staff our cases with the state's attorney, with WomenSafe, with Probation and Parole, with the Counseling Service, to see what the needs are that need to be met for the victim. We also work closely with the Department of Children and Families because we also investigate sexual abuse on children and serious physical abuse of children. So we work together with the Department of Children and Families. Our goal is to minimize the number of times that a victim has to be interviewed. So if DCF is involved, we will do a joint interview and a joint investigation. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for the victims. Hence, that's why we have a very low-key place for them to go instead of going to a police department. and meeting in a cold, sterile room, and we have people there that can address their needs immediately. And then there are times, most of our cases are sexual abuse cases, but we do some follow-ups for domestic assault cases, particularly if the children have been witnesses. Sometimes when a domestic comes in, more often than not, it's in the middle of the night. There may only be a couple of officers responding. They have to deal with the victim. They have to deal with the offender. There may be children who have witnessed it. So we, the detectives who have been trained in child forensic interviewing, will meet with the children as close to the time of the incident as possible to see what they can tell us about what happened, and to make sure, again, that they're in a safe place. If there is a domestic involved where a child is a witness, police are mandated to report to the Department of Children and Families, so we can make sure that the children are not at risk. And I will pass it to Carrie, and then if there are questions.
Hold it closer. Is that a little better? Okay. Okay. Do you want to repeat anything? No. Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and thank you for having me. And this is very helpful. As Becky said, I'm Carrie from WomenSafe. We're the local agency that serves Addison County and Rochester, Vermont. We work with folks across the gender spectrum who've experienced domestic or sexual violence and stalking. Our services are 24 hours a day. Their hotline services are available. Someone can come out to meet a person who needs assistance at the police station or at the hospital 24 hours a day. We also do housing advocacy. That's usually during the day, and systems advocacy. We try to meet each person who comes into our office where they're at and address the needs that they have. We work with phenomenally resourceful people, right, who've had some pretty horrific experiences in their lives. Many folks we work with use the criminal justice system. Many folks we work with don't. So we try to really follow their lead and support them in what they feel is their path back to wholeness. We also have a supervised visitation program that happens in the courthouse, and that's where parents for whom the court or the Department of Children and Families have decided that they might be a risk to their children, but it's still important that they have a link with their child, right? Many studies have shown that children want links with their parents even when those parents aren't quite safe. We're providing a safe, supervised atmosphere for kids to have that connection and for parents to have that connection. That happens at the courthouse. And lastly, one of the really exciting pieces that we do is prevention work across the county. So we start with kindergarten and preschool, and up to second grade, and in those classrooms, we're talking with kids about boundaries, we're talking with kids about empathy skills, we're talking with kids about communication and knowing their bodies and knowing how to respect each other. Then we move into the more middle elementary school years, expanding that, talking about friendships and relationships and how you be connected with others in your environment and how you look out for each other and who to talk to if you're concerned. And then high school, we're talking about healthy sexuality, what is consent, healthy relationships, how to help a friend, how to intervene. And we also work with college students and adults, that very similar messaging. We're always looking for ways to expand our outreach, to connect with more people. If you see venues that you feel like, gosh, this would be a great place for you to connect with, we'd love to do that. And we do a great bit of collaborative work with the folks at the table and many other community partners to really try and make Addison County a place that really wraps around people. And I actually will say that I feel really proud to do work in this county. I feel like we have some great community partners who really work incredibly hard. Excellent.
Thank you, Carrie. Dennis?
And I'll try not to be too loud with the mic. I'm used to speaking in places where I don't need a microphone for people to hear me, and oftentimes people complain that I'm being too loud. So I am Dennis Wegmans. I'm the state's attorney here in Addison County. Prior to being the state's attorney, I was a dedicated prosecutor here in Addison County, prosecuting both sexual assault and domestic assault cases. I worked a lot with the folks here at this table at trying to develop systems that would both address the concerns of people who are victimized, but also address larger concerns of our community and how our community is also considering these types of offenses. One of the things that's great about being down here, I live in South Burlington and I commute every day. One of the things about being down here is we have a dedicated prosecutor who focuses just on that, and that's largely because of the efforts, if not all because of the efforts of WomenSafe, and they fund through a grant that position. In addition, they also help fund an investigator to help investigate cases after we receive them. Oftentimes, things occur after an offense has already happened that is also criminal in nature. And so it's great having an investigator on board that can go out and investigate those types of cases that are brought to our attention by victims in our courts. It's an interesting area to practice in and to work in. The issues that face domestic victims and sexual assault victims are unique. They are much different than a lot of the issues that people from different types of crime face. It's not just making someone whole insofar as, if somebody's robbed, a lot of times it's, okay, you've helped to pay me back for what I lost, and the person's being punished, and there is some trauma associated with that, but not to the same extent of what a lot of the folks face. If there's one challenge that I can speak to in our community, it's that there still is a great deal of ignorance when it comes to especially domestic assault. I've heard some pretty terrible comments from potential jurors about this is none of our business, we shouldn't really be talking about this, I shouldn't be here for just a slap, that sort of thing. And so there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, I think, in our community to make people aware of these are real issues, these are real problems that really need to be addressed. And so one of the things that I like doing and coming out and speaking in these sorts of things is just trying to get people to kind of be more comfortable having that conversation with people that they have come in contact with. It's a silent crime in some ways because there are a lot of people, a lot of times we're not seeing the case in our office until something's happened 3, 4, maybe sometimes as many as 5 times. And so the more conversations that people have about especially domestic assault in our community, I think that they'll become more aware of the fact that this isn't just something that happens once in a while at somebody else's house. I think they'd be surprised at how regularly this sort of thing rears its head. And so I think it's really important to have those kinds of conversations. We've made wonderful strides, I think, in our community as far as people being comfortable reporting sex crimes, and especially with children through their education at schools and stuff. We have a great system in place that's really, I think, capturing a lot of those offenses. But domestic assault, we're still in the dark ages, and it would be great for people to be more willing to talk about that sort of thing.
I'm Melissa Dees. I am the Director of Domestic Violence to Responsible Choices. And what I do is teach, educate men that have been convicted or have volunteered or been referred by DCF. That can be anybody can refer a man to me. But most of the times it comes from the court, that they've been convicted of domestic violence. I spent a lot of time helping men to understand that what they thought was the norm, what they didn't even recognize as abuse, is abuse. And that's the crux of the problem in our culture, is that they, from the time little boys are growing up, right from very beginning, they are given a lot of message about what a man's supposed to be. And that is through videos, it's through war, it's through music, it's through all kinds of avenues to tell him he's supposed to be powerful, he's supposed to always have the right answer, he's supposed to. But they don't talk about his humanness. They don't talk about what else is there. And so when he's faced with fear, when he's faced with embarrassment, when he's faced with insecurity, he has to cover that up. And especially in front of the people that he loves, in front of his partner, who he's supposed to control. And so when stress is added to that, or possibly drugs and alcohol are added to that, we get explosions. We get a lot of abusive behavior, and it's not just physical abuse. Probably one of the most scarring abuse is emotional abuse, is calling each other really horrific names, and there's a purpose behind that. It's not just because I'm mad, it's because if I make you feel bad enough about yourself, you're not going to leave me. And my biggest fear is that I'm going to lose you because I don't feel good about myself, and I know I'm not being a good husband to you. And that's how it perpetuates itself. So our work is to help create an environment for these men to be able to talk about what they have done, to be accountable for it, to understand the both short-term and long-term effects they've had on their partners. And these men don't want to have bad relationships. They all, almost, not everybody, but most of them have really good hearts. I mean, I usually, they're with us for 27 weeks, so I'm with them for 6 months. And we care a whole lot about them, and we want them to succeed. We see how many of them have been traumatized as children themselves because they've seen a lot of violence, or they've experienced a lot of violence. And many of them, have gone through, it's amazing how many men have gone through sexual violence when they were children. And some horrible things have happened to them. So they have no place to go with that. There's no one to say to them, what I say to them when I'm doing an intake is I look them in the eyes and I say to them, I am so sorry that ever happened to you. That is a heartbreaker. It should never happen to any child anywhere. And it's probably one of the first times they've ever heard anybody say that to them, and they cry because somebody is actually saying, it's not okay that this happened to you. So a lot of this is really about healing. Yeah, we have a big job here. Everybody over here, WomenSafe is doing everything they can to help the women heal and to understand that, to see themselves something other than a victim, to see their whole selves. And our job for the men is to help them heal and to see all of themselves. One of the things that we say to them at the end of each class is, say one thing that you appreciate about yourself, so that they keep building on that. Because there's a whole lot more to them other than being abusers. So there's great shame in that room. There's great sorrow. There's tremendous heartbreak. But usually by the time that they have left our groups, they have a whole lot more skills. And one of the most important things that we tell them is you get to choose who you want to be any moment, anytime. It doesn't matter what somebody else is doing. It just doesn't matter. What matters is who you choose to be, what you choose to believe, and does it serve you? So just in a nutshell, that's what we do. And terribly grateful for everybody that's working with us.
Well, thank you all. And it's interesting because when we were planning this event, I guess our naive feeling was that this topic is now out in the open, as I said, and it's something that people do want to know more about. And here we have 4 people who are working so hard to do what the mission of WomenSafe is, to ultimately to eliminate domestic and sexual violence, to eliminate it. And everybody at this table is working toward that. And yet still, when Melissa came in, she said, well, I don't know, it's a topic that people don't want to talk about. So it seems that, unfortunately, as a lot of you had said, that still is the case. So I wanted to start the questions off, and then we'll open them up to anything that you have to ask. You know, what needs to be done? What's the next step? What are the gaps?
I can start. Yeah. So, I see as my role as a prosecutor. I think a lot of people see the prosecutors on TV, and they're often, somebody who's kind of racking up convictions, and the most important thing to them is whether or not the perpetrator is going to jail at the end of the program. I don't see my role as that. I see my role as being somebody who can try to make sure that person never comes back. And part of where we have gaps is we don't have a lot of tools to achieve that goal. We have, as Melissa said, we have her program that domestic offenders can go to, but I see people who come back a second time or maybe a third time, and they say, well, if I could have afforded to go because they have to pay their own way, I would have gone back and maybe this wouldn't have happened, because I could feel myself going back into that cycle. Part of the area where we have gaps is that our criminal justice system has been developed as kind of a solution approach. It's either you're good enough to be out in the community and you're going to go talk to your parole officer or your probation officer every once in a while, or you're going to jail and you're going to be stuck in there for however long. There is a third alternative, and we don't really use it much in this country. We could have a rehabilitative living facility, as opposed to a place where somebody is going to just be going to a jail, which I don't know if anybody here has ever been to a jail. It's not a very pleasant place. Or somebody's just going back to that same home where dysfunction lives and survives. If we had that third alternative of a rehabilitative home, I think that we could go a long way towards helping people learn how to live better lives, ones where they don't feel that the need to abuse others. That's another area of gap, and I think everybody would probably say the same thing. It's housing. Housing is a huge problem for people. If you're stuck in an abusive relationship and you really want to get out, but you're stuck in a minimum wage job and your partner is somebody who is the sole breadwinner, essentially, it's hard to leave. Who's going to support your kids?
I'll expand just a little bit. One of the things that I think, it's sort of the big picture question. Most of the people who walk through our doors, right? It's domestic and sexual violence is one piece of what's happening in their lives, right? And so other forms of systemic oppression are impacting, be that homelessness, be that economic disenfranchisement, be that racism, right? So I think that's a really big picture, right, level, but I think to the extent that we can really work as communities to include everyone and have everyone's voice be something that's heard, recognized, and appreciated, I think that really assists to reduce the ability for isolation, the ability for people to be trapped and stuck and taken advantage of and not heard. Because one of the things I think many of us can agree on is that much more often people are more stuck in situations where there's domestic or sexual violence when there are other things happening, when they're more vulnerable in other ways, when there's not access to housing, when there's not access to resources, when there's not a supportive family. So building those community connections and seeing each other can make a huge difference.
To add on to that problem are drugs and alcohol. Because a lot of people have addictions, and it's, as you know, rampant throughout Addison County and Chittenden County. I work in Chittenden County too. So it's with that pressure women can get addicted, or their partners are addicted, and it just creates a lot of problems. So we need to have a lot of help in that direction. Is to stop the spread of drugs and drugs particularly, but also to get these people help, and so that they can find a different way of living their lives. The people that are coming, Dennis hit on a little bit, these men are having a hard time being able to afford coming to our classes. Some men do really well, and some men who are just sliding through with finances can barely, get their cars together enough to actually drive to the class. So we need subsidies for these men. And that used to come through other grants that are no longer here anymore. And unfortunately, one of the things that keeps our heads above water sometimes is that WomenSafe gets some money for us from a grant. And otherwise, we might have to close. There are times where we might have to close because there's just not enough coming our way. And we're really dependent on however many men are in that classroom, or if they're going to come up. So how these cases are, whether a woman's going to report that this is going on, and she may not report it's going on for many reasons that we've already been talking about. She doesn't want to lose her housing. This is the father of her children. It takes women generally 7 times, right, before they're actually going to come through, go all the way through with reporting. And meanwhile, they've been suffering for a very long time and trying to survive. So women have to be very resilient and really brave, but men, when they get into our classes, that's one of the bravest things they'll ever have to do. But they got to be able to get there. And that's where we need the help, is finance. It's always funding, right? So.
So we're going to open it up to any questions that you may have for any or all of the panelists. And I think the best thing would be to use that mic. Just step up to that mic. Anybody? And just say who your question and who you want to.
Well, I do have a question, and I think I'd be interested in everybody's perspective. It is a kind of depressing topic, but I hope you have a ray of hope to give us. What would you say are the long-term trends? Are we spiraling down, or are we actually making an impact on this problem, or these problems, multiple problems?
I watch the men as they go through 6 months of our classes, and I see a lot of shifts and changes in them. They come back and they'll tell us, I've been using this listening skill that you've been teaching us, and it's really making a difference. Or I'm no matter what's going on, I always am speaking respectfully. I'm trying to keep her safe and letting her know. And that takes time, and not everybody is really good at that. There's an old pattern that's been there for a long time. But when they're successful, it just makes a huge difference in what their family life is, what's happening in their family. But every time one man changes his thinking, changes his beliefs, changes how he responds to his family, he's affecting his kids. And they grow up in a very different environment. And he's affecting her. So she's spreading that out in her world, and the kids are spreading it out in their world, and they're going to respond differently to everybody else. That goes a long ways. That's how we got here in the first place, is somewhere a long time ago, someone felt it was okay to be abusive. And that got passed out and passed out and passed out and passed out, and so it's all over the place, And that's the way we can change it, is because you're the culture. I'm the culture. We're all the culture.
So my optimistic side first. We have seen an incredibly low rate of recidivism in domestic assault cases in our county. I think it's largely because of the work that Melissa's doing. It's been very effective, very impactful, and it has changed lives. We probably have the lowest recidivism rate in the state. And I know for a fact from talking to former offenders that the biggest reason for that is because of the class. I also know on the flip side, however, that part of it also is that oftentimes when someone does get to that point where they're going to report, they don't know that it's going to go as far as it goes. And so we do see some backsliding in that area as well, where people have called, finally have their partner's been arrested, is being prosecuted, and they just don't want to see that repeated. And that's where an organization like WomenSafe is really effective and needs to be there, because those folks still need that moment in time where they just have to get away for their own safety. And WomenSafe provides that. When it comes to sexual assault, we are seeing an increasing rate of report for child sex crimes. That is a positive, because we've known for a long time that the vast majority of those cases were not being reported. Childhood education has played an enormous role in ensuring that that has been the effect, and it's impactful. It's been, we're doing quite well, I think, in that area. Areas where we still need a lot of improvement, reporting of adult sexual assaults. We all know that they're occurring in our communities, but we live in very small communities, and so people are embarrassed. They're concerned about what impact it's going to have on them and their families and their reputation in the community, because there still is a huge stigma attached to being a victim of sexual assault. Areas where we're seeing an opening of floodgates that we are not prepared to deal with is in child sexting. It's an epidemic. Children who are sending images to themselves and then expanding to sending images to adults that they have contact with on the internet is at an epidemic level. If we were to deal with every single case that came down the pipe in that area right now in this county, it would probably outnumber all of our other cases.
I'd like to echo what Dennis said about the impact on the victims. The criminal justice system is not speedy. And more often than not, when we deal with the victim of a sexual assault, and they realize that this is going to be hanging over their head for 1 to 2 to 3 years, their response is, I wish I'd never reported, because it is hanging over their head. They don't have to be in court all the time, but it's out there, and knowing at some point they might have to testify at a jury trial, and all of these various hearings that happen, and depositions, and they're preparing, whether they're in high school and preparing to go off to college, or they're working, or they want to move or get on with their life, they're stuck in this criminal justice system for up to 3 years. And that is a real disservice to the victims, and there's no way to make it better. It's, I often feel guilty when I have to meet with a victim, and then I explain the process, and it's like, oh, why did I ever come forward? A lot of times it comes through a mandated reporter. Doesn't make it any better. The juvenile system is a little speedier than the adult system, but that is something that really needs to be dealt with, is how long the system takes.
So the piece about hope, I will say I see a lot of places for hope, right? First of all, despite the fact that the system does take a long time, there are people who care in the system. And I started in this work a while ago, but not so long, in 1996, right? So it was a while ago. And I will tell you that there are more people who really care now, right? And there's more understanding in the system. That's really increasing. I think an even bigger source of hope for me is that I know that each of you knows and respects an amazing survivor. Survivors are resilient, they're resourceful, they've gotten through some pretty horrible stuff, right? And so people are resilient, right? That's a source of hope. I'm not saying it's okay that domestic and sexual violence happens. I am saying that that's not the end of somebody's life, right? That's a piece, hopefully not the end. The other place I see a lot of hope is in prevention work. I have to say that in classrooms now, we have a prevention coordinator who's been in classrooms. We've been in classrooms for 10 years. The stories we're hearing, right, are different. It's not, kids know when we're coming in what we're going to talk about. The teachers have already prepped them for a lot of stuff, and the questions they're asking are questions like, how do we change this? How do we act? How do we teach our parents? How do we teach our grandparents? How do we change the world, right? We're seeing this in so many different places. So there is so much hope. I also think that I'm really called by the question, hope is not a passive gift, it's an active process. So I think we have to cultivate it sometimes too. And I work really hard at that.
Other questions from the audience?
For each of you and all of you, if you had a wish list of what you could have from Madison County, what would it be, and how much do you think you could get in money to pay for it? Probably housing would be a big issue.
I would wish that we had more mental health providers because there's an incredibly long wait list for mental health services, and people can't wait 2 and 3 months. I'm always grateful when DCF is involved in my cases because they can bump somebody to the top of the list, but if I have an adult person, an adult victim come in, it can be months and months before they can get in to see a mental health provider, and then they have to figure out how to pay for it. Victims' compensation can assist with that if the case is prosecuted. So my wish list would be more mental health providers that can respond in a timely fashion. Not their fault. I mean, they all have waiting lists, but that would be my wish.
I would say housing is certainly a huge need. Just and affordable housing. I will say we're building housing, which is helpful, but more housing that's affordable. And I would love another few educators. I have to say, I think that that's we do our best to get in each of the classrooms 6 to 10 times in the 30 schools that we have. And that's a lot for a person and a half to do each year, right? So I think that that would be really great. We work with some great teachers, and that's really helpful. But we're seeing some new research that's saying putting advocacy services in the classroom is the best practice. So we want to meet that need. I think that those are the top two for me.
So I would say that my wish is probably already being paid for, but the money's going in the wrong place. I don't think that we need a $900 million new jail. As I said before, I think that we need to explore an alternative that's related to housing, but it's also related to transitional housing. It's also related to providing rehabilitative housing, so a place where offenders can be sentenced to that isn't jail, that allows them to keep their job, that they can attend group sessions like the ones that Melissa provides, and it would provide her with a space because she's had to search a number of times since I've been here for a new space, where they would be with peers, where they would be with people who are providing rehabilitative services, and also where they're able to pick up maybe where they left off when they started abusing drugs or alcohol as far as their lives are concerned, or then also learn how to live. Because a lot of folks, adults in our community, weren't ever taught. This is how you go grocery shopping. This is how you plan, your week. This is how you fill out a job application. This is how you get up in the morning and start your day. Those skills are lost in a number of the folks in our communities. And I hate to look at it from an offender perspective, but I'm a prosecutor, so I think that would go a long way towards resolving a lot of the problems that we're seeing in our communities from an offender standpoint. And then I think we also could build from that. I had a great job when I was younger, working at a group home in Oakland, California, with kids who were juvenile offenders, and I saw the change that it made in those kids' lives. And these are kids who lived pretty violent lives. Some of them are rapists, some of them are drug dealers, some of them had attempted murder. A lot of them had some pretty violent offenses under their belt. They ended up graduating from high school with a diploma, not just a GED. A lot of them ended up going to college. These programs work. We know they work, and we should be using them. And that's why I say we're already paying for it. We're sending 400 people out of state and paying somebody else to house them. A lot of those folks could be right here in our communities serving their time in a much more productive way.
I'm going to go along with everybody here. I would agree with Ruth as far as we need more mental health care. I mean, I have men that are suicidal, and I can't get them in to get some help, or they're experiencing childhood trauma. If they can get through that piece, then they're going to be open to be educated. But also, we need funding to help build the education pieces. There's more than just men that are abusive. There are women that are abusive as well, and they need a different kind of curriculum to help them. There's also, we're looking at women that are still with the men that have abused them or going back to them. I'm teaching the men all these different skills, but the women don't have those skills. And so if we could teach them just the skills, then they have a better chance of having a more peaceful relationship. So it's really funding all the work that takes, which is building curriculums, which is training facilitators, and we're certified, so everybody needs to continue to be certified by the state.
And Fran, did you? Yeah. One of you, my question is about emotional abuse. One of you said that's so rampant and that it's sometimes even worse. But it's not a crime, is it? So how do people who experience emotional abuse, say in their home or so on, how do they come to the attention of any of you, and how do they get help? Because it seems as if that is sort of the forgotten side of domestic abuse.
I might be the most likely place, or we might be the most likely place that someone who's experiencing emotional abuse would access. Although friends and family might be as well. When folks call the hotline, honestly, emotional abuse is a lot of what we talk about, because that's that daily degradation that takes away your belief in yourself, right? And one thing that I can tell you is that when we believe in ourselves, we can move mountains, right? And when we don't, even the easiest, most simple daily acts get really hard. So part of our work, right, is to restore people's belief, restore people's agency, to give them tools, right? And that might be the smallest piece. One of the things that the advocates that we work with kind of start with is asking the person we're working with, if they come in the office, would you like the door open or shut? It's your choice, right? Would you like coffee, tea, water? That's your choice. Would you like some information? Right? And just really saying, these are your choices, and affirming, helping them rewrite that story about themselves, right? Because the story they've been hearing is that they're worthless, but the truth, right, is most likely that they're a parent who's truly trying against adversity every day, or they're a person who's found housing even though they don't have employment, or they've kept their job even though every morning their partner is degrading them, right? And they show up and they're engaged. So helping to rewrite that story. So really the story, it reflects what the person's real life is like, and then helping them to own that story, right? And sometimes that works just through us, right? Sometimes that means accessing mental health services. So it's working with someone to find that resource, pushing to find the resource, right? So that's the short answer. Not so short.
One of the classes that we teach is emotional abuse versus respect. The men have to be really accountable, and one of the things they really understand is all the things they say to their partners, which are really vile, as how that affects them. the other part that they, even before they even come to classes, I ask them, has anybody abused you? And a lot of times I hear very similar things. So we help them to understand what the effects are. Most people don't realize their own power. They just don't understand that. And when they start to see that that power goes a long way, that it crushes their partner. Like I ask them, what attracted you to her when you first met her? Well, she was fun, she was smart, she was full of life, she loved to be around people. How do you see her now that you've been telling her she's not any good? Telling her that, she's not good in bed, she doesn't take care of the house. What's she like now? The light's gone out. She's just got her head down all the time. Is that the same person that you married? No. They get that. They know that they've been doing that. And so they understand, when you lay it out like that, they start to see the powerful effects of it. And they also see that they're losing their partner. They're losing the very person they love and what kind of person she was. So they start to shift that and change that. That's probably that's why I say it's one of the greatest things for men to do, that they do not want to see themselves causing that much pain, even though they do it. And so they start to shift that and change that. And then that way, it's a way of stopping this emotional abuse, just through the men that are doing it. And there's far more abuse out there that's emotional all over the place, but at least we start there.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Paul Valenza. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the work that you do. Couple of questions. I have no sense of the numbers that we're dealing with. So if you could just give us some idea, how many people do you see on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, whatever.
Dennis would be better.
Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
So we work with approximately 500 people a year. Weeks vary, right? But typical weeks we're working with about 50 people a week. That's in our services. When we talk about education, we're typically in 3 or 4 schools in any given week. So that's a couple hundred kids typically. And let's see. In a year, we have about 4,000 calls and in-person visits.
So, in a county of 35,000 people, that is really significant, it seems to me. We're talking about 4,000 different people who call, or?
4,000 calls from the 500 people who call.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Or, yeah.
Thanks.
It's still significant.
Yeah.
For criminal cases with adult offenders, we see between 85 and 105 cases that we charge of domestic and sexual assault. That is usually split up roughly half and half are misdemeanor offenses and half are felony offenses. We have probably another, I would say that I think we have another 10 to 15 cases annually that are just not enough to get to the level of probable cause, so they're not charged. And then we investigate on top of that another probably about 150 to 175 cases that turn out to be either somebody's not there yet to tell the full story, their full story of what happened, or it's not a criminal offense. In juvenile, we have roughly 15 to 20 mostly sexual assault cases where we have juvenile offenders. And that's not including the sexting type cases that I was talking about before. And then probably about half a dozen juvenile offenders who have engaged in a domestic assault. Someone asked earlier about areas where we have seen improvement, and that's one of the areas that we have seen improvement, is that we've seen more young people who are willing to come forward and say, what just happened to me was wrong, and I want the person to be, their wrongdoing to be addressed. Juvenile cases are confidential in nature, and rehabilitation is the absolute goal in those cases. So that's roughly what we're seeing. I think that we're seeing a larger number, though, of families in our juvenile caseload that are experiencing a lot of the sexual abuse and domestic abuse, and that's part of the case in the juvenile case. And we see about 200 cases annually with children who are in need of care or supervision.
Our numbers are the worrisome numbers, especially compared to what WomenSafe is seeing. 3 years ago, we have 10 people in a class. That's the most we'll take. 3 years ago, we had 2 classes, which was fine. The beginning of this year, we had 3 men in 1 class. Now we have 5. The state's attorney deputy is telling me that there are about 13 men that are coming our direction. So it's starting to shift, and that is how things happen. It's up and down like that. It just depends on what's going on in court. There's a lot of things that affect that. But it is worrisome that we don't have 2 classes going at least when there's so many people that are in need of that.
Thanks. My next question is, who advocates for you in the legislature, and what happens? Is this a subject legislators are okay about talking about, or would they rather not? And I mean, do you guys work together on figuring out how to go to the legislature? Do you have parent organizations that help you? Who in the legislature is a real advocate?
Let's start.
Probably all of us will.
Start this. There is the Vermont Council of Domestic Violence, and Auburn Watersong legislates for us most of the time. The council, which I'm a part of, and WomenSafe is a part of, they spend a lot of time thinking about figuring out between all of the community members, service providers, what's needed, and then sent into legislation recommendations on where we need to go. And we're always looking for the finances, and the funding's been rejected too many times.
So the Department of State's Attorneys is also combined with sheriffs. We have an executive director in Montpelier. His name is John Campbell. He was the former president pro tem before. And so we have a good advocate working pretty hard for our office, but we're in an interesting position. There are some legislators who have referred to state's attorneys as a necessary evil. And a lot of what happens nationwide, we in Vermont are also painted with that same brush. So there are a lot of prosecutors who are taking advantage of their power and taking advantage of their circumstance. There are a lot of legislators who in other states have been criminalizing things that we don't criminalize. Failing to pay traffic fines and whatnot. People don't go to jail for that here, but that happens elsewhere. So a lot of times that, we get some splashback on that. Our budget is continually, they're continually trying to cut our budget statewide. And our office is in pretty good shape. We could, if it was a real, we're a law office. If we were a practicing firm, we would have 2 more attorneys than we have. We would have 2 paralegals. We'd have 2 more support staff. So we do quite a bit of work for having 3 full-time people, 1 half-time person, 2 3/4-time people, and then 2 full-time support staff. We could use a lot more help, but we're making it work. There are some offices that are absolutely overwhelmed, that have been hit so hard with the opiate problem that they're just absolutely overwhelmed. They'll have 2 or 3 attorneys trying to handle a deluge of 12, 1,500 cases annually.
Dennis, you're on the board of directors for the SIU. Can you talk about the funding?
So the SIU also is funded through our legislature. One of the things that
What's the SIU?
the Special Investigations Unit, the Child Advocacy Center, is partially funded through the legislature through essentially what, for lack of a better phrase, is a block grant system. Those are controlled by a number of different executive directors, and there could be some, I think, cost savings there by creating one person to run a number of those organizations. And there are also some shortfalls locally. We have to pay rent in our facility for investigating sex crimes. We have equipment breakdown. All of our interviews, the legislature has deemed should be recorded. That requires some good recording equipment, and it does break down. I'm the person that goes and fixes it for free. So, I mean, there's a lot of make do, but the SIU, to bring us up to the level of being state of the art, we could use extra funding.
So, as Melissa said, there's a council in Vermont that is a coalition of a lot of different agencies, both state agencies and nonprofits. We're part of the council, and then there are 15 programs around the state like ours that work together and collaborate also to bring forward legislative issues. I have to say that some of our champions, the Addison County delegation, is actually pretty amazing. Often leaders in this work, to be honest. Senator Leahy is just a phenomenal advocate for the Violence Against Women Act, which is really what funds certainly most of my work. That funding that Dennis and Melissa were talking about is from the Violence Against Women Act. And Senator Leahy has been a very long-term champion of that. And really consistently has brought forward issues that expand the act to include more people in the United States, and just make sure that survivors are heard and advocated for.
And I would like to give a shout out to our Addison County Sheriff, because he contributes a lot of money out of his budget to make the Child Advocacy Center and the Special Investigation Unit run effectively. He contributes an awful lot out of his budget that he does not have to do. So he's been instrumental in making it successful.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, one more question. It's really been helpful. If you're in a situation where somebody comes to you and your sense is, or you can involve them in a conversation, that they've been abused sexually, what's the step? Who do you call? And the reason I ask this is because I'm haunted by a situation about 30 years ago, which was I was driving in a park in Washington, D.C., came across a woman dressed in jogging clothes, full of mud. She was, stopping any car that could. I stopped. I said, "What's the matter?" She said, I've been attacked." She didn't say more than that. And I said, "Get in. Where do you want to go?" She kept saying, "I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home." And I kept saying, "There is a police station right at the park." I kept saying, "You ought to go to the police. You ought to go to the police." And finally she said, "Okay." And when we went in, the policeman, a nice gentleman, said, "I'll take over." And sort of, you need to leave. And it has haunted me as to whether that was the right thing to do or not, or whether I should just have taken her home. So I'd be interested.
So I think we'll each have a different answer based on our work. But one of the things I would say is that I think it's phenomenally important when you're working with someone who's just been assaulted or meeting someone who's just been assaulted. Their ability to make choices for themselves has been radically stripped from them, right? So the first thing I would say is really ask them, right, in any way that you can. You know, my first concern really is health related, right, medical care. And then, you know, offering them options of using the legal system or not. You don't have to make that choice right then. But often medical care is something that's helpful right away. And yeah, then I'll pass along. Then folks can use it.
Obviously, being a police officer, I would like to make the offender accountable for what he or she did. But I agree, clearly, medical is first. Dennis, I'm going to let you speak to the We Have Options program that we've been trying to implement, which may be beneficial.
I think I reiterate, though, that the first thing I would do is to ensure the person is receiving medical care. I think it's the most important thing that can occur.
So I'm sorry, did you say that? Is emergency room
Right.
the right place?
It serves two purposes. Okay, first off, it serves to address their medical needs, but it also there's going to be what they call a sane examination that will occur at the same time, and that's very important evidentiary because there's certain stuff that could be collected that could help to catch a perpetrator in hair or other fibers or semen or something of that nature that would not necessarily be collected because a lot of times, you know, this is a person who's in shock. And one of the first instincts is going to be, I got to wash this mud off. And there goes all the evidence. But, you know, most important really is their physical well-being at that point. They're not yet at a point where they're even going to be addressing it emotionally. And that's the long-term healing that occurs. One of the things that's really important to me is that I'm aware of how long the system is. I wouldn't wish victimization on anybody in our system. It's a grueling experience. It can go on anywhere from 2 to 3 years. I've had cases with child victims where they were a child, a small child at the time of the offense, and they're an adolescent at the time of the trial. Trying to remember what happened over that span of time is a remarkable exercise. It's very difficult. Every day they're going to school, and they're trying to live that life of a child, but in the back of their mind, they're still thinking about, you know, am I safe? Is this going to happen to me again? And what's going to happen with my kids? So a lot of that healing can start at the hospital level. A lot of what we try to do is to minimize that by having as few interviews as possible and so on. With adults, one of the things that's been happening it's started out in Northern California and it's been kind of happening elsewhere, is a program called You Have Options. We've been effectively implementing that, and that is that I believe that unless we have a circumstance where we know we're dealing with a violent serial offender, I am going to, under many circumstances, give an adult the opportunity of not prosecuting. That if we do have enough information about the offender, that perhaps right now we're better off for them to wait. There is no statute of limitations at this point in these cases, and so part of it is a person's really fragile in that circumstance. Bringing a case right immediately, you're trying to put your life back together, and then you have this parallel system that is difficult for most people to comprehend running at the same time, and you've tied in a lot of your own worth with that outcome. And it's really hard to balance those two things. So one thing that we've been talking about and trying to implement, you know, more widespread is that you know, there's a third alternative, and that is that we'll move forward when you're comfortable, when you feel like you're in the right place. And a lot of times we end up with resolutions, especially in child cases, where we can't put the child in a place of being in the driver's seat, so to speak. we have a higher mandate than that. But we do resolve cases that, we may not agree to that resolution if it weren't for the fact that it would just be too damaging on the child to, proceed.
Paul, I wanted to say the thing that you did that really worked was you picked her up. Okay, and that's a big deal. And the other piece is, I'm speaking to the fact that you're saying it haunts you. The other one I want to speak to is you can only work with what you know in the moment. That's all the information you have right then. And so you choose what you think is the right thing. So, yay, you picked her up and you did what you thought was the best thing. So that's great.
I'd love to say a little bit more about that. I was like, right, we should celebrate that. It's possible everyone here has heard of the bystander effect, but this is this interesting thing in social science that we've learned about. And there are some pretty horrific stories that we could talk about, but the bystander effect is the more people around the situation when something's happening that's scary or bad, the less likely someone is to intervene and step in. And this is how horrible situations happen in public venues. So the fact that people were passing by and you could just pass by was awesome and breaking the bystander effect. And if more of us could do that, it would really improve our communities. So thank you.
Can I ask you? So is the long process, the 3-year process, is that unique to Vermont? Are there other states who have found some way to do it better? Are there best practices somewhere, or are we just stuck with this?
It's our system. It is the same everywhere in the country. The average length of a sexual assault case is just over 2 years to prosecute to completion. Our system is developed, and it's important that it's developed the way that it is to protect the rights of the accused. It's not a safe or happy environment for the victim of a crime, however. So, in protecting the rights of the accused, part of what gets lost in the process is there's someone here looking for accountability who has put possibly some weight on the outcome and how they're going to proceed. A lot of people have expressed to me that the whole time that the case is going on, they felt like their lives were on hold and that they couldn't proceed, and that a lot of people experience a great catharsis when the end comes, so to speak. And what overwhelms them most of the time is the amount of grief that they feel when there's a verdict, oftentimes a guilty verdict, because they're suddenly coming to terms with something else that isn't the case. I don't know what we can do to fix it. I don't know if there is anything that can be done to fix it. It's something that is developed over a couple hundred of years. And part of it is also the system here is a little bit more difficult for folks because we do have depositions in criminal cases. That isn't the case in many, many states. And so there's an extra level that somebody may have to deal with. So I don't know that there is anything that can be done to change it. It's kind of the way it is. If we had less cases overall, that might help, because then there wouldn't be such a delay of a lot of, just kind of going through the motions until we can get to a trial.
Thanks. Appreciate your patience and all of your insights.
Any other questions?
Well, I've got one more, and I'm sitting where I can smell a chocolate dessert, so hopefully this will be the last one. And I want to say I just admire all the stuff that all of you do, and I'm so glad that MCTV is here tonight recording this, and I hope that it gets played where it gets seen, because your message is really important. And one of the things that I hadn't really thought about at all Dennis, is the issue of sexting. And we should probably wrap up pretty quickly, but I'm just wondering about the whole phenomenon of social media and the way people are communicating, and to what extent that contributes to either the solution to the problem.
First?
As Dennis said earlier, sexting is an epidemic. The schools are very concerned. The school-based clinicians are very concerned. And everybody's trying to come up with a solution, and I don't think there has been one yet. But the shift, as Dennis said earlier, is when I first started doing this, it was generally two kids trading naked photos of each other. Okay, not a good idea. Oftentimes they were shared among the peers. But now we're seeing more sharing of photographs on various apps with unknown adult offenders. And we really believe that a lot of these people are meeting these adults to hook up with them. And we're talking about juveniles. So it's spiraled out to a more serious problem. And we do have a couple of people in the county that are trying to hit all of the schools to talk to the kids about sexting. We've done that before. The ones we really need to be talking to are the parents, because when I've gone to the schools and talked with the kids about sexting, and you ask how many parents check your online activity, I'm going to say it's less than 10 to 20%. But we don't have a hook to get to the parents. The students, the school calls us in, we talk to them, they're a captive audience. So the schools have tried to get parents in. The parents that they're able to get in for a presentation are probably the ones that are already doing everything that they can. So I don't know what the answer is. I hope somebody else can come up with one.
Well, I can't really give an answer. I don't think I have a solution to the problem other than, I think that Ruth touched on something. We need to do a better job at reaching parents and educating them of the actual danger. I think a lot of them are thinking, well, when I was a kid, we went behind the barn and I showed mine and she showed hers, and what's wrong with that? They're not really comprehending that what we're seeing now is a girl or a boy who may have started with that kind of behavior of just sending something to their significant other, and then next thing you know, they're communicating with, in some cases, more than 100 adult men online, sharing images
And
videos, and communicating pretty graphically to the point of role play and then meeting up with these people. Just here in our community, one example I can give you is I had a case where a girl started with someone who she believed was a boy that she had met from New Jersey online. He was actually an adult man. He had already been convicted of a crime where he was extorting sex from a local woman that worked at McDonald's down the street from him. He had somehow procured a New Jersey Troopers uniform and had gone into the McDonald's and was told her that if she didn't engage in sexual activity with him, that he knew people that could have her child taken away from her. She was 18 or 19 years old. He was on probation when he started communicating with a girl up here in Middlebury. And it got to the point where he was telling her that she was going to meet him at a cabin that he owned up in the Adirondacks. He didn't own that cabin. He was going to meet her somewhere that he had just picked off of a map. She refused, and he then gathered information about her whole family and threatened to do harm to her boyfriend, threatened to do harm to her parents. She finally turned him in. Our office worked with Middlebury Police Department and the FBI, and when we finally caught up with this guy, he had just exchanged a week's worth of groceries for a 16-year-old and was transporting her from Pennsylvania to New Jersey to impregnate her. This is a real danger. It's a real danger to your children in this community. And I don't think that people comprehend that it might start out innocently enough, but it can spiral really rapidly. And we're seeing some grave dysfunction, sexual dysfunction, emotional dysfunction amongst teenagers who are trying to balance their own, budding sexuality with engaging in trying to, keep 100 guys happy online.
That's a tough one to end on. But as Ben said, he's smelling those chocolate desserts. Before we go to the desserts, though, can we have a huge hand for our panelists? All for being here and also for the good works that you do. Before we do go to desserts, we ended up talking about youth and social media, but a lot of the hopeful things that we were hearing had to do with youth. So in another hopeful vein, I would just like to make an announcement for those of you in the area that Middlebury will have its own March for Our Lives, the march that was initiated by youth. There's one in Washington and one in Montpelier and one in Rutland, but Middlebury will be having its own March for Our Lives this Saturday on the town green, 12 to 2, and we'll have some youthful speakers and some other speakers. Robin Chai is going to be among the speakers, so that's a positive thing. There are some important gun sense bills going through the legislature right now, so that's something else for everybody to keep in mind. Desserts at the back. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Yeah.